My guest is Robert Ellie Rubenstein. He's a businessman in Canada, but he's also an author of a book called An Italian Renaissance, Choosing Life in Canada. Welcome to the show, Ellie.
Thank you.
Ellie is how you're called among your friends, so I'm going to regard you as my friend. But I'm going to talk about this book, but not yet. I want to talk about you because it's interesting that the book is mainly not about you. It's about your parents, and we'll get to them. But I want to talk about your life in Toronto and your background. You're born in this Italian camp, and you describe it it's not a concentration camp, it's a rest and recuperation camp. And you describe the Italians treating you very well. Do you have any memories of that period?
I have no memories because I was only 5 months old when I left with my parents. So what I know about the camp is what I heard from my dear mother, the only one of my two parents who talked about that time, and what I managed to learn on my own in later years.
And the sense of the camp is the way you portray it in the book, is Italians being very warm and wonderful to you. That's the message she gave?
That's the message I got from my mother. Of course, as a young child, I accepted uncritically whatever my parents told me. I did love and respect them then and continue to throughout all the years. But as time went on, I learned that the truth was somewhat more complex than what my mother had conveyed to me. And I discovered that she had her own reasons for presenting what went on at the camp in the way that she did.
Well, we'll return to that. You grew up, and you grew up as a kid, and your father doesn't talk to you about the Holocaust. And the Holocaust really isn't part of discourse, really, till as you say, Eichmann. I think for all Jews. It wasn't part of the world.
Yeah, I was a teenager when I first learned about the Holocaust.
Yeah. And then at first, you described you didn't believe it. You were, 11 years old or so? Yeah. And you didn't believe it. But when you were told about it, did it throw some understanding about your family and your history that you didn't have before?
Certainly. There were lots of things that didn't make sense, but as a kid you don't think about them very much. I knew from an early age, of course, that my parents were different. They were obviously immigrants. They spoke funny English, and they just weren't tuned into the culture of the place in the way that the parents of my school friends were.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Associated Hebrew School.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Down on Brunswick for the first couple of years, and then when we moved north to the new school on Neptune.
Now, because there must have been a number of survivors in the school, weren't there?
There were, but there was a sort of conspiracy of silence, if you can call it that. No one talked about it. The survivors weren't ready to talk, and the non-survivors weren't ready to listen. And certainly small children were ill-equipped to deal with it, even if they did know about it. So it was something that no one talked about, no one dealt with in those days.
When did you find it began to be part of being dealt with? And when did your mother start talking to groups and kids? When did that happen?
Well, I think the Holocaust really came out in the mid-'60s. That was when books started to appear, Elie Wiesel's Night, and others to follow.
You quote Primo Levi and...
But for the 2 decades up until that time, there was virtually nothing. Nothing was being written, hardly anything, and it certainly wasn't being talked about. So when it started to become something that the people were conscious of, and the first discussion started, those of us who had some connection started to tap into it.
When I do my scholarship, and I'll say the myth that Israel was created as a response to guilt over the Holocaust, and I say it's nonsense. I've done the research in the paper. They don't even talk about the Holocaust at all in any of the discussions in the UN, etc. It's not there. So the silence isn't only among the families, it's a world silence.
That's right.
And that changes really the first time I detect is with Eichmann. And then it begins to grow into a public discussion. And the capture, so that's the 1960 on. Because I think with it, that silence is a growth of a myth. That the myth of Israel is in the Middle East because the Europeans and the Americans felt guilty about the Holocaust. And I don't think there's an iota of truth in that. And yet, Jews will say it as well as Gentiles. It's not just a restricted item.
Well, Jews are as impressionable as anyone else, and if an idea becomes current, we're as susceptible to being influenced by it as anyone else.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to your growth. You grew up and you're brought up in a Jewish environment. One of the choices you make is not only you're living in Canada, but you choose to live the Orthodox life. And for a lot of Hungarian refugees, they didn't do that. Why did your family, you sort of tell a bit of it here, but I want to bring out some more of it. Why was that the choice for you? I mean, I as a kid was brought up Orthodox, and most of the friends I have all left Orthodoxy. You didn't. What makes the difference?
I think that you and your generation growing up in Toronto were on the way out, and we, our group, as the children of survivors, were on the way in, those of us who did come in. And you're perfectly correct that it was only a minority that did that. But for us, it was a process of rediscovery. Well, rediscovery for my parents and discovery for those of us who were the children. And it was tied into our love and respect for our parents. So when they came, their faith had been shattered. They underwent a real spiritual crisis, which I describe in the book at considerable length. And they struggled, and this is the way that they found why they did it. You can come up with all kinds of explanations for that. It has to do with the community that they came to, the particular characteristics of that community. It has to do with other members of the family who were a wonderful support system. They helped one another in finding their way. So they were coming from a collapse of faith after the Holocaust. It didn't happen in the camps because they were too busy just surviving. You couldn't afford to be demoralized. You couldn't afford to philosophize very much. You had to worry about how you're going to stay alive to the next day. But once they were liberated, that's when the crisis really set in, and I described that as well. Right. My parents, like the others, had to deal with this. Most of them did not find their way back to the Judaism of their childhood, and those who did find it back couldn't return to innocence. That was no longer possible. They knew too much. They had seen too much to contradict. The clear, simple, traditional view of God and the Jewish people and how they interact in the world.
But your father was tough about it in a way, because when people around him had to work on Shabbat, and he said, "No, I'm not doing it." I mean, that shows a real strength of character. Yes. Given this, he's pretty impoverished when he's doing that. He's not got extra money or anything else, and he's taking big risks, and he has already a family.
My father, of blessed memory, had unbelievable strength of character. He was not an educated man. He never had the opportunity in the little village in Hungary that he grew up in. He had a grade 4 education, and you can imagine what they learned, in one classroom with all the grades put together. And so he didn't have any formal education, but he sure learned in the school of life. And there were things that he was very determined about. And despite everything, he held on to those things. That was his anchor. That's what gave him the the inner resources to deal with all the challenges that he had to face.
Yeah, he comes across like your mother and father were very, very different from the book. And he comes across as almost the archetypal, silent, it's all inside. And yet, but you didn't have much contact with him. You say he was working early in the morning, he was gone, and when you got up, and he came home very late. He worked long hours.
I didn't have much contact with him while I was growing up, and that wasn't his choice. I'm sure he would have wanted to spend more time with me and with my little sister had he been able to. But he was just so focused on making a living and building a better life in Canada for his family. Later on in life, after I finished my studies and went into the family business, I found myself spending a great deal of time with my father. For years we worked together, and I had the office across the hall, and we would spend long hours talking about things.
Well, I want to go back to those conversations. We're going to take a break, and then I want you to tell me some things about those conversations.